I very recently, a few days ago, got this very interesting book called The New Polytheism, and it was published in 1981. And it, talks about a lot of these pagan things that I like. But guess who wrote the foreword to this book? Our old friend Henri Corbin. Corbin, this was near the end of his life, wrote this foreword in the form of a letter to the author of this book, who was a colleague of James Hillman. And, this is a little known writing from Corbin. I've never come across it before. And I really liked it because it articulates a lot of what I would consider to be my creed. It articulates, something that I articulated sort of on my own, but then, had it reinforced through individuals or philosophers such as Proclus. But I thought I would read this to you because, it's easy enough for me to come and say my perspective. I'm a heretic, but, Orban to come here and put it also in the language of Sufism to a certain extent and basically defend polytheism through Sufism, I thought was just fantastic. And I think I would like, if you're game for it, just for me to read a few passages here.
Yeah.
And, I'd be happy to.
All right. So, I have been guided by the way in which the great theosophist Ibn Arabi and his school meditated on Tawheed, the attestation of the One, to staggering heights. There's a theological Tawheed, which is the profession of exoteric monotheistic faith, i.e., there is no God but God. And there's an esoteric ontological Tawheed, which states there is no being but God. The catastrophe results already long ago from confusing being, Arabic wujud, with a being, Arabic mawjud. If in effect God is solely being, then he could not himself properly be a being, not even a supreme being. By confusing being with a supreme being, that is by making of esse an ens supremum, monotheism perishes in its triumph. It elevates an idol just at the point where it denounces such in a polytheism it poorly understands. Only a negative theology, apophatic, is able to encompass by indirection the mystery of being. But official monotheism never had much love for negative theology. Insofar as being brings each existent into being, it must itself be beyond all existence. It is impossible to express this mystery of being, which brings each being into being, that is, mystery of the One, which brings each being into being as an existence. Its unitude, is 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, etc., while the multiple unity of beings is represented by 1 plus 1 plus 1, etc. To confuse being with a being is the metaphysical catastrophe par excellence. It is the death of being to confuse the unity of being, esse, with a pseudo-unity of beings, ens, which is essentially multiple. It is precisely this confusion that monotheism has committed, a confusion between divinity and gods. A unique theotos is not to be confused with a unique theos, any more than unique being is confused with a unique being. There can be only one theotos, just as being, esse, is unique. Were this not the case, we would not be able even to speak of the gods in the plural. The predicate precedes the subject, which is why being is antecedent to being, and why divinity precedes both God and the gods. A unique God as a supreme being will always follow upon the divinity which one attributes to it. By confusing the uniqueness of divinity with the singular God, which excludes all other gods, unique being with a singular being, monotheistic theology has itself prepared the way for precisely the death of God, just as the confusion between being and being entails the death of being, leaving a place only for a totalitarian sense of the existent. In return, the unity of theos entails conditions and guarantees the plurality of the gods, just as the unity of being entails and conditions the plurality of beings. The "there is no God but God" becomes "there is no God without gods." The expression Ilah Aleha, God of gods, occurs frequently in Sufrawardi. It is the very nature of the dietas abscondita to be revealed and made manifest by the plurality of its theophanies in an unlimited number of theophanic forms. Theomonism bears within itself the rebirth of the gods as theophanies of the theota, and this renaissance conditions the rebirth of religious individuality, about which each can say and can say nothing other than, "I am able to grasp such as I have seen." This is the Gnostic formulation par excellence. God has died of a long disease. That disease is called monotheism. But the God of the Gnostics can never die, because he is himself the place of the renaissance of gods and goddesses.
What was that last sentence?
God has died of a long disease called monotheism. But the God of the Gnostics can never die, because he is himself the place of the renaissance of gods and goddesses.
Oh, the Renaissance. All right. Well, I think he makes some good points in there.
Yeah, he may have over-elaborated it, but what he says is true.
Yes. Well, and one of the big downfalls of humankind is to equate being with existence.
Right? Same error.
Yes, right. Anyway.
I like it, and well said.
Yeah.
And I think the important thing there is that, he basically says most of what we see as monotheism exoterically is against idol worship, but in reality worships an idol, because the God they worship, no God but God, is a being rather than being as such. And the esoteric truth of all religions, is that there is no being but being. And, it of course gets a bit, some of this stuff is like wading through a swamp if you're not familiar with Corbon's Heideggerian terminology. And, it's actually much easier, I think, in French or German, or Latin for that matter, which has different words for different forms of being, whereas English, you just basically are having to use being over and over again. But he has a good point there, and the point is simply that, if you have the right view of the unity of being, then it opens up this massive amount of potentiality for gods and angels and plurality within the world, a plurality within unity.
Well, to the extent one lives in plurality, why should there be a limitation on divine forms? But the Gnostic know, so there's a way out.
Well, labels are always limiting, but we need them. They just have a practical function. But I've always thought of myself as a perennialist. But is that, in fact, am I really a polytheist or a pantheist?
Well, pantheism is, considered a theological error, but it describes something.
If you're a monotheist.
Yes, and it has the unfortunate effect sometime of equating material existence to being. But, everything is God and everything is in God, and you sort of have to live between those two.
And I think a lot of these labels are simultaneously true. I would say pantheism is true in the sense that a pantheist would believe that all that we see in front of us is God. Absolutely. That is 100% the case, as long as we don't limit it and say that God is only what we see in front of us. That's a theological error. The panentheists, the Vedantins, are also true, as are the classical Greek henotheists, who would say there is one God, but there are many gods. But again, all of this is put to human terminology, something that is far beyond human terminology.
Isn't that always the problem?
It is. But what I really like, since, this is really, the farther you get into it, he defends apophatic theology. And I really just love that sentence where he says, God has died of a long disease called monotheism.
Yes, right. Finally, apophatic theology is the best, the most useful, and I think is often regarded as such. Netty, netty.
Right, yes. I mean, if you want to find what's behind everything, you have to eliminate everything that blocks your view.
Netty, netty.
Yes. You don't have to eliminate it. You just simply have to know that it's just a concept.
And, there's within Tibetan Buddhism, there's 4 major schools. The school of the Dalai Lama is the school that most people are familiar with, and it's mired in far too much theology. All the theology bogs it down. And, one of the things that Lama Angarika Govinda talks about in his books is how, there's something that not as many people know about that grew up alongside of this, called the path of the Vajra, the diamond, or as he translates it into English, the direct path. And let's get rid of all of this over-intellectualization and just do the practices. Focus on the breath, get attention, stay aware, stay present. And then, of course, there's practices with the mandalas and everything. But essentially, it's a path focused on practices. And
yes, here.
And I'm very curious, actually, how much Francis and Greg and some of these others are aware of the Tibetan direct path, or did they primarily come from the Vedantan, the Hindu school?
I could only think of Greg as somebody with that kind of breadth, since he has a PhD in philosophy and has been around the spiritual block for a long time. He's the only one of the set who resembles anything like a scholar of paths, but scholarship is only valid for comparison.
Right.
But let's go back to my question. I always thought I was a perennialist, but I guess I'm a pantheist. That's really apples and oranges, isn't it?
It is apples and oranges, yes. Ultimately, my way of looking at perennialism is, if you believe in the unity of being, no matter what someone practices or what their beliefs are, without any sort of empirical proof to back it up, you have to look at it not in terms of an objective statement of absolute truth, but a subjective statement of the person's psyche interacting with the divine. And in that case, really all paths are true, including some of the really wacky paths that have come around. As long as they believe in the unity of being, and without necessarily actually articulating it as such, all paths have validity, except atheist materialism.
They have a touch of validity because you can see the world in that way, but it's, pretty limited.
Right. And I would simply say you shouldn't be going around judging paths, but if you are going to, write a scorecard up for paths as a perennialist, it should simply be, what degree of effectiveness does this have, allowing someone in this world to live a happy and joyful life, and what degree of benefit does it give to the soul's journey towards the divine?
Right.
And ultimately, all of these different things are really just metaphor. You look to a lot of what the ancient Greeks said, or the Tibetans, or the Hindus, or whatnot. It's symbols that are conditioned by a particular time and particular place that are honed over a period of sometimes thousands of years and exist in the form of metaphor that shows what one person or one group experience on their path to God. And I think that that's very useful. And for that reason, I actually think certain types of poetry and story and myth is actually much more valuable approach from the right angle than philosophy and theology.
Well, I don't know. They're both good.
I mean, look at it this way, okay, there's this wonderful author, Jaime de Angulo, who was this Spanish anthropologist who moved to the US and was living with various Native American tribes, learned something like 50 languages, but never wanted to teach in the schools. He just simply wanted to learn these things. And he wrote an article about this Native American tribe in Northern California. And he said that there were anthropologists that were saying, oh, look at them. They don't have any of these concepts of God or anything. It proves that God is a later addition to our lives and he is some sort of corruption of an ancient form of atheism. He said, no, these people are wrong. These people don't have to speak about things like God. These people don't have to talk about what's sacred because their whole lives are sacred.
Exactly.
Right.
You know, I never did seriously look up what panentheism is. I think I have a picture of you in the company of David Griffin. That's the cousin. He was big into 9/11 trutherism and well spoken about it, but he's a theologist. He's in theology. That's what he's been teaching and writing about. And we were talking one time and he said, yeah, I'm not as much a pantheist as a panentheist.
So I can explain the difference. So a pantheist would believe that God is all and all is God. End of story. A panentheist would believe that God is all and all is God, but God transcends all of that. So a pantheist would believe that God is right here and now, and a panentheist would say God is here and now, but he's also transcendent. So he's immanent and transcendent, whereas a pantheist would say God is immanent.
I see.
Okay.
Well, I respect his position a little bit now. I tried to read one of his books once and I just couldn't do it.
But let me quickly add, the problem discussed a minute ago in the reading was about intellectualization. That's the very problem that Sheikh Isa was telling me about with respect to the tariqa and the Jananic path. You know, it becomes a matter of footnotes.
Yes.
I always thought that was a wonderful discussion.
Sure.
Interview.
Well, I mean, it's true. It's so true because every single time I've read stories of disciples of true gurus, they said that the teaching of the guru was not in their words. It was in the spaces in between their words. It was the unspoken teachings and certainly the unwritten teachings. And I think it's hilarious that you have dozens of volumes of commentary being written on Ramana Maharishi or Yogi Milarepa or countless other saints when their true esoteric teachings were transmitted in person from the guru to the disciple, not through some sort of intellectual means. And that's anything that's there, even with the right intention, is only going to be a corruption of their true teachings.
Right.
Well, I think you can have discussion and ways of looking at things and describing what, from one person's point of view, is what the teacher was radiating. But it is said that the gurus or the saints or whatever save by their presence. And that's what satsang is supposed to be.
Right. Well, I heard Francis Lucille say as recently as last weekend about the truth is in the space between the words.
Yes. I've encountered that elsewhere too. Somebody saying, stop focusing on the things, start paying attention to the empty places. And words were one of the illustrations.
Right.
There's this brief quote from Ludwig Klages here that gets to this point. He who realizes that actuality, or what we call reality, is the product of our own actions, which start in the mind, will be thoroughly freed from the materialistic conception of the world as a self-existing or given reality. This is by far more convincing than all the theoretical or philosophical arguments. It is practical experience, and this has an infinitely deeper going effect than the strongest intellectual conviction, because the act of spiritual vision transforms the seer, which obviously demonstrates the extreme opposite to the act of perception, which differentiates the perceiver from the object of perception and thus makes him conscious of his narrow separateness.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Well, I always felt like being a perennialist was basically not closing your account with reality prematurely. Let's see, was it William James said? I don't know. But, you allow that there are multiple expressions of the divine. You don't have to study every one or practice every one. So
I've always taken great refuge in being a perennialist because I believe in the Sophia Perennis. But is that not unlike being a pantheist?
I think it can be both.
Okay.
I mean, you can be a perennialist without being a pantheist and a pantheist without being a perennialist, but I think being both at the same time makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Kind of hard to be a pantheist without being a perennialist.
I mean, okay, let's say you're a pantheist and you say, I'm starting the exclusive church of pantheism and my way or the highway and all of these other religions.
Okay.
Yeah.
Say to Zainab, are we making sense?
We are, but I'm also thinking that we're reiterating the point, and ultimately, if I understand this correctly, the point is a path without a practice is like a wandering mind with no direction. So there are many intellectual traditions, there are many writings, there are many works that can be read of saints and sages, but none of that will make sense unless the practice is taken seriously, and the practice brings about a transformation to experience that immanence and transcendence in our own experience of God.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I
Somebody
hope that
write
makes
that down. I thought that was eloquently stated.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. It was.
Thank you.
And, you know, since I placed this also a couple of times now in an intellectual way, I think a lot of this can be summed up by Lawrence, who spent most of his life thinking about these things, and near the end of his life put a lot of this into poetry. And one of these that I think is really relevant to us now is called Maximus. And theologically, it has a lot to say to us, but it also has that touch of humor that I really like. And it's short, if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Go ahead. Yeah.
God is older than the sun and moon, and the eye cannot behold him, nor voice describe him. But a naked man, a stranger, leaned on the gate with his cloak over his arm, waiting to be asked in. So I called him, "Come in, if you will." He came in slowly and sat down by the hearth. I said to him, "And what is your name?" He looked at me without an answer, but such loveliness entered me. I smiled to myself, saying, "He is God." So he said, "Hermes, God is older than the sun and moon, and I cannot behold him, nor the voice describe him. And still, this is the god Hermes sitting by my hearth."
I like.
Well said.
Yeah. I mean, it's really experiential.
Yes, that's what I like about a lot of his poems, is it's not about getting in the head and, you know, trying to put metaphysical propositions in verse, but it's about experience, you know.
Well, you know, experience is just another way that we encounter God. Perhaps the only way, but just think of all the possibilities there are in experience. It's a pretty amazing phenomenon, experience.
Yes, what an unbelievable miracle it is.
Yes.
And you know, the questions in our Tariqa have always been, what did you think today? What did you read today? What did you write today? It's
Right.
never, what have you experienced today? And that's the more important question.
Right. Here. We all agree.
Mm-hmm.
We could ask, you know, what's new and really mean it in terms of experience, not in terms of eternal. What have you seen? You know, that's what, there are a number of spiritual teachers that encourage that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, experience and looking at things anew and seeing them in many ways as they are. You know, I think I mentioned on Tuesday, spotting someone use the expression, "an idea occurred to me."
Yes.
What an unbelievably powerful thing that is. You know?
Yeah,
Isn't this all wonderful?
It is.
of course.
It's all wonderful.
And, you know, one of the important spiritual principles is to realize that it's all wonderful, even if you don't see it all. And I imagine things like gratitude help in that. Gratitude, I think, contributes to that.
Indeed.
Opens you more to it.
You know, one of the things I really like about the language of Buddhism is that it speaks of emotions in the terms of cultivation. And I like that because it puts in my mind visions of gardeners, you know, like Sheikh Abu Bakr or old-time farmers. You know, you have to cultivate things. You don't generate an emotion. You don't have an emotion. You cultivate these things. You cultivate gratitude.
Oh, yes. Yeah, it's a practice.
Yes, maybe there are some that are born saints, but for most people, loving kindness isn't something that comes automatically. Loving kindness is something that you have to foster, something that you have to cultivate. And if you approach your loving kindness with a spirit of loving kindness, if you love and have kindness to yourself, then, you're going to see your heart growing and developing, in a beautiful way. And I love some of these simple Jataka tales that the Buddhists tell to children, because they're full of these stories of sudden transformation. That there's a criminal, there's a robber, there's a horrible person, someone that was doing horrible things, and they had this sudden experience of illumination and they changed. Or there are these great stories where, they approach, let's say, a monk and ask them for, let's say, magical powers to do something for the wrong reason. And the monk is smart and tells them, okay, but you've just got to do these practices, just do them for a month. And suddenly, by the time they finish the practices for the month, they've developed the magical powers or whatnot, but they no longer want to use them because they've seen through the veil of Maya and become a different person. Or you could say their true self. And that's one thing that's so beautiful about these traditions compared to a lot of what we have in the West, because it's just so cut and dry. Original sin, perdition, heaven and hell. Oh, you've done one crime, that's it. You're damned for the next million years.
Yeah, longer than that.
Yes, I was being generous.
That shows your loving kindness.
I feel like we're doing a lot of good stuff today.
Well, maybe.
I guess I'm feeling better about being a Sufi perennialist pantheist.
Sure. Putting those words together already indicates that you're not trying to confine it.
Exactly. And one has to listen to their inner daemon. One has to listen to their inner God, because ultimately one knows what is true if they dig down deep enough. The immanent touches the transcendent, so to speak. But if most of what we have as religion, as much as it has a point and a value for the masses, at a certain point starts acting like a veil. And if you can't rend those veils asunder and listen to your own soul with faith and trust and have a spirit of intuition about it, then you're going to always be led astray. And so if your inner daemon, Sheikh al-Bashir, is saying you're a Sufi perennialist pantheist, then I would trust that.
Well, I would trust it too, and I do trust it. The problem is I don't know that I'm going to be able to get anybody else to trust it.
Well, they have to trust their experience of it.
Yes, that's
it doesn't matter whether anybody else trusts it or not. You have to trust it, and that person has to trust it in his or her own experience of it.
Yes, all right, well said.
Right. Let me put it in this terms. If all you wanted to do was say, I'm a Sufi perennialist pantheist, that's the right way, now all of you should believe that. Well, that's not going to do anybody.
No.
Exactly. So the important point is really to focus on the practices, as I think you've been doing an excellent job with, and opening things up with the members of the Tariqa so that they can experience whatever it is they need to experience for themselves. The really beautiful thing about experience is they may or not end up experiencing Sufi perennialist pantheism. I experience some different things that are a bit wacky, but that's okay. Other people experience some other things. Maybe someone, experiences a theophany or the dancing of the angels on the head of a pin. That's all great too. Ultimately, it comes down to experience, and you're not going to get people to experience things by talking about doctrine. It can help certain people at certain way stations along the path. Doctrine is like the gasoline that you pick up from the gas station. You need it on the path, but ultimately it's a tool for the journey, not the journey itself. And the practices are the van you're driving in to get you where you need to go.
Yes.
Well, good. I think that's very clear. I agree. So where are we?
So I can get back to the list of questions now.
In the next 6 minutes, let's attack it.
Is there a spirit of place in certain geographical locations that makes one's quest for the divine more or less profitable in those locations?
Well, Yes, but I think for a variety of reasons. Number one is making the effort to go to one of those places is a way of taking responsibility and doing something for one with one's soul. Places are well known for having a particular presence or beauty or atmosphere that reminds people of the interior or the one thing needful. Now, of course, all of those things are available right here and now, but often one needs a little formal prompting to find them. It may be more difficult to find here and now, but they're here and now. But often people find it valuable to go on some sort of journey or pilgrimage to affirm that or remind themselves of that. Of course, I think it's an error to think that those celestial qualities are there and not here, but going there may help one to see.
Yeah, I've certainly been fed by some experiences of nature.
Yes, sure.
But one thing occurred to me earlier was that when you talk about seeing things as a veil, it really means you've already seen a little bit beyond the veil. Otherwise, you wouldn't see the veil.
Right. That's right.
And isn't that encouraging?
It is indeed. And I mean, I've been to many of these, not many, I've been to several of these places. I've been to Mecca and Delphi and the Black Hills, places that are frequently referred to in those terms. And they're all wonderful. And I'd like to go back, but I know the one thing needful is here and now, and one, I might add.
And you can't do that again.
Well, there is that. There is that.
It might be better, but it's not the same thing.
Right.
In my experience, as much as it's worthwhile going to some of these places, and as much as I truly believe each place has the spirit of the place, I find that the journey is more important and more worthwhile than the actual destination. I think the pilgrimage to Mecca is more important than Mecca. I think any kind of journey, if one has awareness and presence in the here and now during that journey, the journey is going to give them much more throughout their life than the actual arrival in whatever sacred space it may be.
Right. And when you're on a journey, you're constantly seeing something new.
Yes, that's right. That's right.
Which is an opportunity to come to the realization that it's all that way. In other words, you're constantly in a new situation. So all of your experiences are new. And to experience everything as new is pretty close to the goal.
There was an author who I can't recall at the present time who said something I liked. He said, for him, the biggest problem with modern technology was that it was too convenient, and the modes of travel were so convenient and so fast that it didn't allow one to actually experience and enjoy the journey. It's already over before it seems like it started. And I think there's a point to that, because when I look back on my life, the most valuable journeys I've had were often the ones that were most difficult.
Sure.
Yeah, that sounds categorically true.
Yes. And in situations like that, you are more present, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's something to be said for struggle in the sense of rejecting, not rejecting, but moving opposite to something that's going on, and it's actually going on in you.
Say that again.
I said, whatever is going on in the struggle is going on in you. So if you can perceive that the struggle is there, and pretty much only there, then, it's a good thing.
Yeah, that struggle in you. And that's why, as Badria says, it's the difficulty that's important.
Right. Going against one's own nature in a certain sense.
Yes.
Going against the habitual, unconscious behavior. I remember many years ago thinking, if these are my emotions, why can't I have the emotion I want? Why can I not just choose what emotional state I want to be in? Why?
Is there some reason you can't?
Well, I don't think there is ultimately, but it really disconnects one from a lot of things you might think of as the cause. Because in a certain sense, you do choose your emotional state, but you don't realize it.
Tell us more.
Well, you at least have to assent to it. It wouldn't stick if you didn't identify with it. if you didn't. Yeah. I mean, and once you have that kind of attitude toward these passing feelings, they simultaneously become less important in their individual character.
Okay, I understand.
Yeah.